When an elderly man in simple clothes walked into the most exclusive Mercedes dealership, nobody expected what happened next. His 5 words would change everything forever. The morning sun cast long shadows across the polished marble floor of Premier Motors, the most prestigious Mercedes dealership in the city. The gleaming trucks and luxury vehicles stood like monuments to wealth and success, their chrome surfaces reflecting the artificial lights that made everything sparkle with an almost celestial glow. Marcus Wellington adjusted his tie for the 3rd time that morning as he surveyed his domain. At 32, he was the youngest sales manager the dealership had ever promoted, and he wore that achievement like armor. His perfectly styled hair and designer suit spoke of someone who understood that image was everything in this business. Behind him, his team of salespeople moved with the practiced efficiency of sharks sensing blood in the water, each one hungry for their next commission. "Remember," Marcus announced to his gathered team during their morning briefing, "we're not just selling vehicles today. We're selling dreams, aspirations, status symbols. Our clients don't just want transportation. They want to make a statement about who they are and where they belong in this world." The team nodded in unison, their eyes gleaming with the same predatory hunger that had made Premier Motors the most successful luxury dealership in 3 states. These weren't ordinary car salespeople. They were carefully selected professionals who could smell wealth from across a showroom floor and knew exactly how to extract maximum profit from every interaction. Bradley Sinclair, a veteran salesman with 15 years of experience, straightened his cufflinks as he prepared for another day of pursuing high-end clients. His reputation for closing 6-figure deals had earned him a corner office and the respect of his peers. Next to him, Jennifer Walsh checked her tablet, reviewing the profiles of several potential buyers who had scheduled appointments for the day. The morning proceeded with its usual rhythm: wealthy executives examining the latest models, tech entrepreneurs comparing specifications, and society wives selecting vehicles that would complement their lifestyles. Each sale was a carefully choreographed dance of desire, status, and financial capability. Then, at precisely 11:30, the atmosphere shifted. The automatic glass doors of Premier Motors whispered open, and Harold stepped inside. His weathered hands clutched a small faded cloth bag, and his simple attire stood in stark contrast to the opulent surroundings. His gray beard showed signs of careful but modest grooming, and his gentle eyes took in the magnificent displays with quiet appreciation, rather than the covetous hunger typically seen in their clientele. The effect was immediate and unmistakable. Conversations died mid-sentence as heads turned to assess this unexpected visitor. The usual background hum of sophisticated sales discussions gave way to an uncomfortable silence that seemed to stretch across the entire showroom floor. Marcus felt his jaw tighten as he observed the elderly man's slow, deliberate approach toward the commercial vehicle section. This was exactly the kind of situation that could disrupt the carefully maintained atmosphere of exclusivity that Premier Motors had cultivated over decades. Their reputation wasn't built on serving everyone, it was built on serving the right kind of everyone. Bradley caught Marcus's eye and raised an eyebrow in a silent question. The message was clear. Should they even acknowledge this obvious mismatch between client and establishment? Jennifer discreetly stepped behind a display model, clearly hoping to avoid any interaction that might prove awkward or unprofitable. Harold seemed oblivious to the stares and whispered comments that followed his progress through the showroom. He moved with the unhurried pace of someone who had learned that rushing rarely improved outcomes, his fingers occasionally reaching out to touch the smooth surfaces of the vehicles, with something approaching reverence. When he finally stopped before a magnificent display of Mercedes commercial trucks, the crown jewels of the dealership's fleet, his expression remained calm and thoughtful. These weren't just vehicles. They were engineering marvels that represented the pinnacle of German automotive excellence, each one priced well into 6 figures. Marcus made a decision that would haunt him for the rest of his career. Rather than approaching Harold with the professional courtesy that Premier Motors claimed to extend to all visitors, he chose to send a message. He dispatched Trevor, the newest and least experienced member of their sales team, to handle what he assumed would be a brief and pointless interaction. Trevor, barely 25 and still learning the intricacies of luxury vehicle sales, approached Harold with barely concealed reluctance. His body language screamed discomfort as he positioned himself at what he considered a safe distance from the elderly visitor. "Can I help you find something?" Trevor asked, his tone carrying just enough politeness to avoid outright rudeness, while making it clear that he expected this interaction to be mercifully brief. Harold turned slowly, his weathered face breaking into a gentle smile that seemed to illuminate his entire presence. "Yes, young man, I'm interested in purchasing some trucks." The words hung in the air like a challenge to everything the sales team thought they understood about their business. Trevor's expression shifted through several emotions: confusion, skepticism, and finally, barely suppressed amusement. "Trucks?" Trevor repeated, as if the word itself was foreign to him. "Sir, these are Mercedes commercial vehicles. They start at several $100,000 each." Harold nodded thoughtfully, seemingly unaware of the condescension dripping from Trevor's voice. "I understand. Quality comes at a price." By now, the entire sales team had found reasons to position themselves within earshot of this increasingly surreal conversation. Marcus stood with his arms crossed, watching the interaction with the detached amusement of someone observing a mildly entertaining sideshow. Trevor glanced back at his colleagues, seeking support or guidance, but found only expectant faces waiting to see how he would handle this obvious waste of everyone's time. The pressure of performing for his peers, combined with his inexperience and growing frustration, began to show in his increasingly dismissive manner. "Sir," Trevor said, his voice taking on the patronizing tone typically reserved for children or the cognitively impaired, "these vehicles are designed for serious commercial operations. They require substantial financial resources, comprehensive insurance coverage, and commercial licensing. Perhaps you might be more comfortable looking at our certified pre-owned section, or maybe visiting one of the domestic dealerships down the street." The silence that followed was deafening. Every person in the showroom held their breath, waiting to see how Harold would respond to what amounted to a polite but unmistakable dismissal. Harold's smile never wavered, but something shifted in his eyes, a flicker of something that might have been disappointment, though whether in Trevor or in humanity in general was impossible to determine. "I see," Harold said quietly, his voice carrying a dignity that made Trevor's previous words seem even more petty in retrospect. "And you've determined this based on what, exactly?" The question caught Trevor off guard. He stammered for a moment, realizing that his assumptions had been laid bare and found wanting. "Well, I mean, obviously." "Obviously what?" Harold's voice remained gentle, but there was steel beneath the silk now. "That someone who doesn't dress according to your expectations couldn't possibly afford your products. That age and simplicity automatically equal poverty and ignorance." Marcus stepped forward, sensing that the situation was spiraling beyond Trevor's ability to control. His intervention was calculated, not to apologize or correct course, but to efficiently end an interaction that was disrupting the showroom's atmosphere. "Sir," Marcus said, his voice carrying the authority of his position, "I think there may be some misunderstanding here. Premier Motors specializes in serving clients with specific needs and capabilities. Perhaps we could direct you to resources that might be more appropriate for your situation." Harold turned his attention to Marcus, and for a moment, the sales manager felt an unexpected chill. There was something in the elderly man's gaze that suggested depths he hadn't anticipated. Intelligence, experience, and a strength that had nothing to do with physical appearance. "More appropriate," Harold repeated slowly, as if tasting the words. "And what would you consider appropriate for someone like me?" The question hung in the air like a sword suspended by a thread. Marcus realized, too late, that he had walked into a trap of his own making. Any answer he gave would reveal the prejudices and assumptions that had guided his approach to this interaction. Before Marcus could formulate a response that might salvage the situation, Harold reached into his simple cloth bag and withdrew something that would change everything. The small leather wallet that Harold extracted from his cloth bag appeared unremarkable at first glance, worn and weathered like its owner, with edges softened by years of use. But as he opened it with deliberate care, the contents began to tell a different story entirely. Marcus watched with growing unease as Harold methodically removed several items from the wallet. First came a collection of business cards, not the cheap, mass-produced kind that cluttered most people's wallets, but heavy, embossed cards that spoke of serious enterprise. Then came membership cards to exclusive clubs that Marcus recognized by reputation alone, places where membership required not just wealth, but connections that money alone couldn't buy. but it was the final item that caused Marcus's confident smirk to falter completely. Harold unfolded a single sheet of paper, a bank statement that, even viewed from several feet away, displayed numbers that made Marcus's monthly sales goals look like pocket change. Trevor, who had been preparing another dismissive comment, found himself speechless as the reality of his mistake began to dawn on him. The elderly man he had been treating with barely concealed contempt was holding financial documents that represented more wealth than Trevor had ever encountered in his brief career. "Now then," Harold said calmly, his voice carrying the same gentle tone despite the seismic shift in power dynamics that had just occurred, "shall we discuss those trucks?" The showroom floor, which moments before had buzzed with the confident energy of predatory salesmanship, now felt charged with an entirely different kind of electricity. Harold had just demonstrated that appearances could be devastatingly deceiving, and every assumption the sales team had made about him lay in ruins at their feet. Marcus felt his throat constrict as he realized the magnitude of the situation. This wasn't just a missed sale. This was a potential catastrophe for his reputation and that of Premier Motors. Word traveled fast in luxury sales circles, and the story of how they had treated a legitimate high-net-worth client would spread like wildfire through their industry. We, Marcus stammered, his usual eloquence deserting him at the moment he needed it most. The confidence that had carried him through countless successful sales presentations evaporated like morning mist, leaving him exposed and vulnerable. Harold patiently waited for Marcus to compose himself, displaying the kind of grace under pressure that spoke of a lifetime of experience in situations where others had underestimated him. His weathered hands carefully returned the documents to his wallet, but the message had been delivered with surgical precision. "Perhaps," Harold suggested with gentle irony, "we could start over. I'm Harold Mitchell, and I'm interested in purchasing 5 Mercedes commercial trucks for my transportation company." The name hit Marcus like a physical blow. Harold Mitchell. Even Trevor, with his limited experience in the luxury market, recognized that name. Mitchell Transport wasn't just any transportation company. It was one of the largest privately owned logistics operations in the region, with contracts spanning multiple states and a reputation for reliability that had made Harold Mitchell a legend in industrial circles. Bradley Sinclair, who had been watching the interaction from what he thought was a safe distance, felt his legs go weak as the full implications became clear. He had spent years building relationships with high-net-worth clients, and he knew that Harold Mitchell's transportation empire represented exactly the kind of commercial account that could make or break a dealership's annual performance. Jennifer Walsh, still partially hidden behind the display model, frantically opened her tablet and began searching for information about Mitchell Transport. What she found made her blood run cold. Annual revenues in the hundreds of millions, a fleet of over 2,000 vehicles, and a reputation for loyalty to vendors who treated the company with respect. Harold continued speaking, his voice maintaining its calm cadence despite the chaos his revelation had created. "I've been considering expanding our premium vehicle fleet, and Mercedes has an excellent reputation for reliability and performance. I was hoping to discuss the purchase of 5 of your top-tier commercial trucks, with potential for additional orders if the initial experience proves satisfactory." The monetary value of what Harold was proposing began to sink in for everyone present. 5 top-tier Mercedes commercial trucks represented a sale worth well over $2 million, more than most of the sales team earned in commissions over an entire year. And his mention of potential additional orders suggested this could be just the beginning of a relationship worth tens of millions of dollars over time. Marcus felt sweat beginning to form on his forehead as he grappled with the professional disaster he had orchestrated. Premier Motors had built its reputation on providing exceptional service to discerning clients, and he had just demonstrated the exact opposite of those values to one of the most significant potential customers they had ever encountered. "Mr. Mitchell," Marcus began, his voice cracking slightly as he attempted to salvage the situation. "I apologize for any misunderstanding. If you'd allow me to personally handle your needs." Harold's gentle smile returned, but there was something different about it now, a knowing quality that suggested he had been in similar situations before and had learned to navigate them with strategic patience. "Misunderstanding," Harold repeated quietly. "Is that what we're calling it?" The question hung in the air like an accusation, forcing Marcus to confront the reality that there had been no misunderstanding at all. The sales team had made conscious choices based on prejudice and assumption, and those choices had been laid bare in the most humiliating way possible. Trevor, who had initiated this cascade of professional embarrassment, stood frozen in place like a deer caught in headlights. His face had gone pale as he realized that his career at Premier Motors, and possibly in luxury sales altogether, might be over before it had truly begun. The story of how he had dismissively treated Harold Mitchell would follow him wherever he went in this industry. Other customers in the showroom had begun to take notice of the drama unfolding near the commercial vehicle display. Wealthy clients who had come to browse luxury cars found themselves witnessing a masterclass in how assumptions about appearance and worth could lead to catastrophic business mistakes. Harold seemed to sense the attention his presence was generating, but rather than appearing uncomfortable or eager to leave, he projected an aura of calm authority that commanded respect. This was clearly a man who had faced skepticism and prejudice throughout his career, and had learned to use others' assumptions as a competitive advantage. "I've been in business for over 4 decades, Harold continued, his voice carrying the weight of experience. "And I've learned that how a company treats someone they believe has no value reveals everything about their true character. It shows what happens when the cameras aren't rolling and the spotlight isn't shining." The observation struck like a knife through the heart of Premier Motors' carefully cultivated image. Marcus realized that Harold wasn't just commenting on this particular interaction. He was delivering a fundamental critique of their business philosophy and corporate culture. Bradley stepped forward, perhaps sensing an opportunity to distance himself from the disaster that Marcus and Trevor had created. "Mr. Mitchell, if I may, I'd be honored to assist you with your truck selection. I have extensive experience with commercial vehicle sales and can ensure you receive the level of service that Mitchell Transport deserves." Harold turned his attention to Bradley, studying him with the same quiet intensity he had shown throughout this entire encounter. "And you are?" "Bradley Sinclair, sir. I've been with Premier Motors for 15 years, and I specialize in high-value commercial accounts." 15 years, Harold mused. "And in all that time, have you learned to judge a book by its cover, Mr. Sinclair?" The question was devastating in its simplicity. Bradley realized that Harold was testing not just his sales ability, but his fundamental character. Any answer that tried to distance himself from his colleagues' behavior would mark him as disloyal, while any answer that defended their actions would mark him as equally prejudiced. "Sir," Bradley said carefully, "I believe that every person who walks through our doors deserves our respect and attention, regardless of their appearance or perceived circumstances." "Interesting," Harold replied. "Then where were you 10 minutes ago when your colleagues were demonstrating the opposite philosophy?" The silence that followed was so complete that the soft hum of the air conditioning system became audible. Harold had just exposed the moral cowardice that allowed prejudice to flourish, not just the active discrimination of people like Trevor and Marcus, but the passive complicity of those who stood by and did nothing while others were mistreated. Jennifer finally emerged from behind the display model, her tablet clutched tightly in her hands as she approached the group. "Mr. Mitchell," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've just been reviewing Mitchell Transport's profile, and I want to say how honored we would be to serve your company's needs." Harold's attention shifted to Jennifer, and she felt the full weight of his scrutiny. "Ms. Walsh, sir, Jennifer Walsh." "Ms. Walsh, do you think I'm stupid?" The blunt question caught Jennifer completely off guard. "No, sir, of course not." "Then why are you pretending that you knew who I was all along? Do you think I didn't notice you hiding behind that car while your colleagues were treating me like an unwelcome intruder?" Jennifer's face flushed red as she realized her attempt at damage control had only made things worse. Harold had seen through her performance immediately, recognizing it for what it was, an opportunistic attempt to capitalize on his revealed wealth while distancing herself from the poor treatment he had received. "The truth is," Harold continued, his voice remaining gentle despite the devastating accuracy of his observations, "none of you knew who I was, and none of you cared to find out. You made your judgments based on my appearance, my age, and your assumptions about what kind of person belongs in a place like this." Marcus felt the situation spiraling completely beyond his control. Every word Harold spoke was accurate, and every attempt to respond only seemed to dig them deeper into the hole they had created for themselves. "Mr. Mitchell," Marcus said desperately. "Please allow us to make this right. Premier Motors has always prided itself on exceptional customer service, and today we fell short of our own standards. If you'll give us another chance—" "Another chance?" Harold's eyebrows rose slightly. "Mr. Wellington, I haven't even told you what I want to buy yet, and you're already asking for another chance. That suggests you believe your first chance was already wasted." The observation was so precise and damning that Marcus felt his knees go weak. Harold had just demonstrated the kind of strategic thinking and psychological insight that had probably contributed to his business success, and he was using those skills to methodically dismantle every defense the sales team attempted to mount. The tension in Premier Motors had reached a breaking point when Harold's phone began to ring. The sharp, professional tone cut through the heavy silence like a blade, and Harold glanced at the screen with the casual indifference of someone accustomed to constant business communication. "Excuse me for a moment," Harold said politely, answering the call with a simple, "Mitchell here." The voice on the other end was loud enough for those nearby to hear fragments of the conversation. Something about delayed shipments, urgent client demands, and the immediate need for additional transportation capacity. As Harold spoke in calm, measured tones about logistics coordination and delivery schedules, the sales team began to grasp the true scope of the business empire they had just insulted. "Yes, I understand the situation," Harold said into the phone, his voice carrying the authority of someone who made decisions worth millions of dollars on a daily basis. "We'll need to expedite the acquisition of additional vehicles. I'm actually at a Mercedes dealership right now, exploring options for expanding our premium fleet." Marcus felt his stomach drop as he realized Harold was discussing their potential business relationship in real time with what sounded like senior executives from his company. The conversation provided a window into the scale of Mitchell Transport's operations. Multiple facilities, hundreds of employees, and time-sensitive contracts that could be worth tens of millions of dollars. "Hold on," Harold said to the person on the phone, then looked directly at Marcus. "Mr. Wellington, given our interaction so far, should I tell my operations manager that Premier Motors is interested in earning our business, or should I have him contact your competitors instead?" The question hit Marcus like a physical blow. Harold wasn't just threatening to walk away from a potential sale. He was offering a choice between redemption and professional suicide. The entire sales team understood that their response to this moment would define not just this transaction, but their careers and the reputation of Premier Motors. Trevor, who had been standing frozen since Harold's identity was revealed, finally found his voice. "Mr. Mitchell, I made a terrible mistake. I judged you unfairly, and I'm deeply sorry for my behavior." Harold studied Trevor for a long moment, his expression unreadable. The young salesman's apology hung in the air, genuine, but perhaps too little, too late. Everyone in the showroom waited to see how Harold would respond to this first attempt at accountability. "Mr. Harold prompted. "Thompson, sir. Trevor Thompson." "Mr. Thompson, do you know what I've learned in 40 years of business?" "No, sir." "That apologies are easy when consequences become clear. The question isn't whether you're sorry now. The question is whether you learned something that will change how you treat the next person who doesn't meet your expectations." The observation was delivered with surgical precision, cutting through Trevor's defensive instincts and forcing him to confront the deeper implications of his behavior. Harold wasn't just addressing Trevor's specific actions. He was challenging the fundamental attitudes that had led to those actions. Meanwhile, other customers in the showroom had begun to gather at a respectful distance, drawn by the dramatic tension unfolding near the commercial vehicle display. Word was spreading quickly through the facility that something extraordinary was happening, that assumptions had been challenged and prejudices exposed in the most public and humiliating way possible. Patricia Hawthorne, the dealership's general manager, emerged from her office in response to reports from her staff about an unusual situation developing on the sales floor. A woman in her 50s with decades of experience in luxury automotive sales, Patricia had built Premier Motors' reputation through careful attention to client relationships and service excellence. As she approached the group gathered around Harold, Patricia's trained eye immediately assessed the situation. She recognized the body language of a sales team in crisis, the defensive postures of people who knew they had made serious mistakes, and most importantly, the calm authority radiating from the elderly man at the center of the controversy. Good afternoon, Patricia said, extending her hand to Harold with the practiced warmth of a seasoned professional. I'm Patricia Hawthorne, General Manager of Premier Motors. I understand you're interested in our commercial vehicle selection. Harold accepted her handshake, studying her with the same careful attention he had shown the sales team. Harold Mitchell. And yes, I was interested. The question now is whether that interest will be reciprocated appropriately. Patricia felt a chill run down her spine as she processed both the name and the subtle threat contained in Harold's words. Like everyone in the automotive industry, she knew the Mitchell Transport name and understood the significance of having Harold Mitchell himself standing in her showroom. Mr. Mitchell, Patricia said carefully, it would be my honor to personally ensure that you receive the exceptional service that Premier Motors is known for. May I ask about your specific vehicle requirements? 5 Mercedes commercial trucks, Harold replied without hesitation. Top-tier models with full commercial packages. And depending on how this experience goes, potentially an ongoing relationship for our fleet modernization program. The numbers began dancing in Patricia's head as she calculated the immediate and long-term value of what Harold was proposing. 5 premium commercial trucks represented over $2 million in immediate sales. But an ongoing fleet relationship with Mitchell Transport could mean tens of millions in revenue over the coming years. Certainly, Patricia said, her professional demeanor masking the excitement building inside her. Would you be comfortable if I personally handled your needs? I want to ensure that every detail meets your specifications. Harold's attention returned to the person on the phone, who had apparently been waiting patiently during this exchange. Robert, I'm going to need you to hold off on contacting other dealerships for now. I'm exploring a potential solution here at Premier Motors. The implication was clear. Harold had been prepared to take his business elsewhere, but Patricia's intervention had earned Premier Motors a reprieve. However, the conditional nature of that reprieve wasn't lost on anyone present. Marcus watched this interaction with growing desperation, realizing that his mishandling of the situation was about to cost him not just a massive commission, but potentially his position as sales manager. Patricia's decision to personally take over Harold's account was a clear indication that she had lost confidence in her sales team's ability to handle high-stakes client relationships. Ms. Hawthorne, Marcus interjected. If I could just explain what happened here. Patricia silenced him with a look that could have frozen molten steel. Mr. Wellington, I think explanations can wait. Right now, our priority is ensuring that Mr. Mitchell receives the attention and respect that he and Mitchell Transport deserve. The public rebuke stung Marcus more than any private criticism could have. Patricia had just made it clear, in front of Harold and the gathered staff, that she held Marcus responsible for whatever had gone wrong in this interaction. Harold ended his phone call and turned his full attention back to the group. Ms. Hawthorne, I appreciate your personal attention to this matter. However, I think it's important that we address what happened here before we move forward. Of course, Patricia replied, though her expression suggested she was dreading whatever Harold was about to reveal. Your sales team made certain assumptions about me based on my appearance, Harold said calmly. They treated me with barely concealed contempt, questioned my ability to afford your products, and suggested that I might be more comfortable shopping elsewhere. Patricia's face went pale as the full scope of the disaster became clear. This wasn't just a missed sales opportunity. This was a public relations nightmare that could destroy Premier Motors' reputation if word spread through their client network. Mr. Mitchell? Patricia said, her voice tight with controlled anger. I can assure you that such behavior is completely contrary to our values and standards. This is not how Premier Motors conducts business, and there will be consequences for what you've experienced. Consequences, Harold repeated thoughtfully. And what form might those consequences take? The question put Patricia in an impossible position. Harold wasn't just asking about disciplinary action. He was testing whether Premier Motors would take meaningful steps to address the cultural problems that had led to his mistreatment. Bradley, sensing that his career was hanging in the balance along with his colleagues, stepped forward again. Mr. Mitchell, if I may, I think we're all struggling with how to adequately apologize for something that should never have happened in the first place. Harold's attention shifted to Bradley, and the veteran salesman felt the full weight of that scrutiny. Mr. Sinclair, you mentioned that you've been here for 15 years. In all that time, how many times have you witnessed similar situations? The question was devastating in its implications. Bradley realized that Harold was asking him to confront not just today's incident, but potentially years of similar behavior that he had witnessed or participated in through action or inaction. Bradley struggled to find words that wouldn't incriminate himself or his colleagues while still maintaining honesty. I think we all have room for improvement in how we approach client interactions. Room for improvement, Harold said, a note of what might have been amusement entering his voice. That's one way to phrase it. Jennifer, who had remained silent since her earlier embarrassment, finally found the courage to speak. Mr. Mitchell, what can we do to make this right? Harold turned to study her, and Jennifer felt as though he was looking directly into her soul. Ms. Walsh, that's the first honest question anyone has asked me since I walked through those doors. The observation sent a ripple of shame through the assembled group. After all the attempts at damage control, deflection, and face-saving, Harold had identified Jennifer's simple question as the only genuine response to the situation. The truth is, Harold continued, I'm not sure you can make this right. What happened here today wasn't an accident or a misunderstanding. It was a choice. Multiple choices, made by multiple people, all based on the same fundamental prejudice. Patricia felt her heart sinking as she realized that Harold wasn't just considering walking away from the sale. He was preparing to do exactly that. The reputation damage from losing Harold's business would be bad enough, but the story of how they had treated him would spread through the luxury automotive community like wildfire. However, Harold added, and everyone present held their breath, I believe in second chances, particularly when people demonstrate genuine willingness to learn from their mistakes. The promise of a second chance hung in the air, like a lifeline thrown to drowning sailors, but Harold's next words carried conditions that would test everyone present in ways they had never imagined. Before we discuss business, Harold said, his voice taking on a tone that suggested he was about to reveal something significant. I think you should understand exactly who you're dealing with and why this situation matters more than you might realize. Patricia nodded eagerly, sensing that Harold was about to provide context that could either save Premier Motors' reputation or destroy it completely. The other customers who had gathered to witness this unprecedented drama leaned in slightly, recognizing that they were about to hear something important. Mitchell Transport wasn't built in corporate boardrooms or inherited from family wealth. Harold began, his weathered hands clasped behind his back as he spoke. It started 40 years ago with a single used truck and a man who was tired of being told he didn't belong in certain places. The words carried a weight that transcended mere business history. Harold was sharing something personal, something that explained not just his success, but his response to the treatment he'd received at Premier Motors. I was 25 years old, fresh out of the military, when I walked into my first bank to request a business loan. I was wearing my best clothes, which weren't very good, and I had a business plan that I'd spent months perfecting. The loan officer took one look at me and suggested I might be more comfortable applying for a job as a delivery driver rather than trying to start my own company. Marcus felt his stomach clench as he recognized uncomfortable parallels between Harold's story and what had just transpired in their showroom. The pattern was becoming clear. Harold had faced this kind of prejudice before, and he had clearly learned how to use it as motivation, rather than allowing it to defeat him. I left that bank without a loan, but I didn't leave empty-handed, Harold continued. I left with a clarity of purpose that has guided every decision I've made since. I promised myself that if I ever built something significant, I would remember how it felt to be dismissed and discounted based on appearances. Trevor shifted uncomfortably as Harold's story unfolded, realizing that he had unknowingly placed himself in a historical tradition of people who had underestimated Harold Mitchell. The pattern suggested that such underestimation typically ended badly for those who made that mistake. 20 banks turned me down before I found one willing to take a chance on me, Harold said. But that experience taught me something valuable about human nature, that most people make decisions based on surface impressions rather than substance, and that creates opportunities for those willing to dig deeper. Patricia found herself genuinely moved by Harold's story, but she also recognized the strategic brilliance of what he was doing. By sharing his background, Harold was transforming this from a simple business transaction into a test of character and values. He was challenging Premier Motors to prove that they were different from those 20 banks that had rejected him. Mitchell Transport now operates in 12 states, Harold continued. employs over 3,000 people, and maintains relationships with vendors who understand that success isn't always packaged the way you expect it to be. We've built our reputation on reliability, integrity, and the principle that every person deserves to be treated with dignity regardless of their appearance or background. The implications were becoming clear to everyone present. Harold wasn't just sharing his business philosophy, he was establishing the criteria by which Premier Motors would be judged. Their response to his story would determine whether they earned his business or became another cautionary tale in his collection of examples about prejudice and missed opportunities. "Now," Harold said, his attention focusing on Marcus with laser-like intensity, "Mr. Wellington, you mentioned wanting to make this right. What does that look like to you?" Marcus felt every eye in the showroom turn toward him, and he realized that his response would define not just his own future, but potentially the future of everyone present. Harold had just shared a deeply personal story about overcoming prejudice, and now he was asking Marcus to demonstrate whether he had truly understood the lesson being offered. "Mr. Mitchell," Marcus began, his voice steady despite the pressure he was feeling, "I think making this right starts with acknowledging that what happened here today was wrong, not just as a business mistake, but as a failure of basic human decency." Harold nodded slowly, encouraging Marcus to continue. "You came into our showroom as a potential customer, and instead of receiving the respect and attention that any person deserves, you were subjected to judgment and dismissal based entirely on superficial factors that have nothing to do with your character, your capabilities, or your needs." "Go on," Harold said quietly. Marcus took a deep breath, realizing that his next words would either begin to repair the damage or seal Premier Motors' fate. More importantly, what happened here today probably wasn't an isolated incident. If we treated you this way based on your appearance, then we've probably treated other people the same way. People who didn't have the resources or platform to hold us accountable for our behavior. The observation hit home with devastating accuracy. Harold's slight smile suggested that Marcus had identified exactly the point he had been hoping someone would reach. This wasn't just about Harold's individual experience. It was about a pattern of behavior that reflected deeper problems with Premier Motors' culture and values. Trevor found himself thinking about other customers he had encountered over the months, people he had quickly dismissed or passed off to junior staff members based on similar snap judgments about their appearance or perceived wealth. The realization that he had probably repeated this mistake multiple times made his stomach turn. "Mr. Wellington," Harold said, "you're beginning to understand the scope of the problem. But understanding isn't the same as solving. What concrete steps would you recommend to ensure that this situation never happens again?" The question forced Marcus to move beyond acknowledgement and apology into the realm of actual solutions. Harold was testing whether Premier Motors was capable of meaningful change or if their response would be limited to empty promises and superficial gestures. "I think we need to fundamentally examine our training programs, our hiring practices, and our performance evaluation criteria," Marcus said, his mind racing as he tried to formulate a comprehensive response. "We need to create systems that reward inclusive behavior and discourage the kind of prejudicial treatment you experienced today." Patricia stepped forward, recognizing that this was her opportunity to demonstrate leadership and commitment to meaningful change. "Mr. Mitchell, if you're willing to work with us, I would like to propose that we use this experience as a catalyst for implementing comprehensive diversity and inclusion training for our entire staff." Harold's attention shifted to Patricia, and she felt the weight of his scrutiny as he evaluated her proposal. "Training is a good start, Ms. Hawthorne, but training without accountability is just performance theater. What mechanisms would you put in place to ensure that the training actually changes behavior?" The question revealed Harold's sophisticated understanding of organizational change. He wasn't interested in cosmetic fixes or public relations gestures. He wanted to see evidence of systemic changes that would prevent future incidents. "Regular mystery shopping evaluations," Patricia replied without hesitation, "conducted by people from diverse backgrounds to test how our staff responds to customers who don't fit traditional profiles of wealth and success. Staff performance reviews that include specific metrics for inclusive customer service. And most importantly, consequences for behavior that fails to meet our standards." Harold nodded approvingly, clearly impressed by Patricia's thoughtful response. "Now you're thinking like someone who wants to solve the problem rather than just manage the fallout." Bradley, who had been listening intently to this exchange, suddenly spoke up. Mr. Mitchell, would you be willing to help us develop these programs? Your perspective as someone who has experienced this kind of treatment could be invaluable in creating training that actually addresses the real issues. The suggestion caught everyone by surprise, including Harold. Bradley had just proposed that the man they had insulted and dismissed become a consultant in reforming their practices. It was either a stroke of genius or a spectacular miscalculation. Harold studied Bradley for a long moment, as if trying to determine whether the suggestion was genuine or merely another attempt at damage control. Mr. Sinclair, are you suggesting that I help Premier Motors become better at treating people like me with respect? I'm suggesting that you help us become better at treating all people with respect, Bradley replied firmly. You've built a successful business based on principles of dignity and inclusion. We could learn from that experience. Harold's expression shifted slightly, revealing what might have been surprise at the boldness and sincerity of Bradley's proposal. For the first time since entering Premier Motors, Harold seemed to be considering possibilities beyond simply testing their responses to his presence. Jennifer seized the moment to add her own perspective. Mr. Mitchell, if we're serious about change, real change, not just words, then having your involvement would demonstrate our commitment not just to fixing this specific situation, but to becoming the kind of company that earns business based on character, rather than just flashy showrooms and high-pressure sales tactics. The conversation had evolved far beyond a simple commercial transaction. Harold had transformed Premier Motors' sales floor into a classroom where lessons about prejudice, accountability, and genuine change were being explored in real time. The question now was whether these lessons would result in meaningful transformation or merely temporary embarrassment. Before I consider any ongoing relationship with Premier Motors, Harold said, his voice taking on a more serious tone, I need to see evidence that you understand the difference between being sorry you got caught and being committed to doing better. The challenge Harold had issued hung in the air like a gauntlet thrown down at the feet of everyone present. Proving the difference between regret and genuine commitment to change would require more than words. It would demand actions that could be measured, evaluated, and sustained over time. Patricia stepped forward, her expression showing the determination of someone who had made a decision that would define her leadership legacy. Mr. Mitchell, you're absolutely right to demand proof rather than promises. If you're willing to give us the opportunity, I'd like to propose a specific plan of action that demonstrates our commitment to meaningful change. Harold's attention focused entirely on Patricia, his expression indicating that he was prepared to listen, but that his standards for what constituted adequate response remained extremely high. The gathered staff and customers waited in tense silence as Patricia prepared to either save Premier Motors' reputation or confirm its failure. First, Patricia began, her voice clear and confident. Effective immediately, I'm implementing a mandatory sensitivity and inclusion training program for every employee at Premier Motors, from sales staff to management to administrative personnel. This training will be conducted by external consultants with expertise in unconscious bias and cultural competency. Harold nodded slightly, acknowledging the proposal without indicating whether he found it sufficient. Continue. Second, we're establishing a client feedback system that specifically asks about the respect and dignity customers feel they received during their visit, regardless of whether they make a purchase. This feedback will be reviewed monthly by senior management and will factor directly into employee performance evaluations. Trevor felt a mixture of anxiety and hope as Patricia outlined these changes. On one hand, the new standards would clearly hold him accountable for behavior he now recognized as problematic. On the other hand, the systematic approach Patricia was describing suggested that Premier Motors was serious about creating an environment where such behavior would no longer be tolerated or overlooked. Third, Patricia continued, we're implementing a mystery shopping program using individuals from diverse backgrounds and varying economic circumstances to regularly test our staff's adherence to inclusive service standards. Staff members who consistently demonstrate respectful professional behavior regardless of a customer's appearance or perceived wealth will be recognized and rewarded. Those who fail to meet these standards will face immediate corrective action. Harold's expression remained neutral, but his slight nod suggested that Patricia was moving in the right direction. However, his next question indicated that he was testing the depth of her commitment. Ms. Hawthorne, these are excellent administrative responses, but they don't address the fundamental question. Are you prepared to lose employees who can't or won't change their behavior? The question cut to the heart of the matter. Patricia realized that Harold was asking whether Premier Motors would prioritize inclusivity over sales performance, whether they would be willing to terminate profitable employees who couldn't adapt to higher standards of human decency. Yes, Patricia replied without hesitation. Anyone who cannot treat every person who walks through our doors with dignity and respect, regardless of their appearance, age, background, or perceived financial status, does not belong at Premier Motors. Period. The definitiveness of her statement sent a ripple through the assembled staff. Patricia had just made it clear that the culture of the dealership was going to change fundamentally, and that adaptation to those changes was not optional. Marcus felt a complex mixture of emotions as he processed Patricia's declaration. Part of him was relieved that Premier Motors was taking the situation seriously and implementing real changes. Another part of him was terrified that his mishandling of Harold's visit might cost him his position, despite his apparent willingness to learn from the experience. "Mr. Mitchell," Marcus said, his voice steady despite his internal turmoil, "I want to personally commit to not just meeting these new standards, but exceeding them. What happened today was inexcusable, and I take full responsibility for my role in creating a culture where such behavior was possible." Harold turned his attention to Marcus, studying him with the same careful intensity he had shown throughout this entire encounter. "Mr. Wellington, accountability is the first step toward redemption, but it's only the first step. What specific actions will you take to demonstrate that your commitment extends beyond this moment of crisis?" Marcus had clearly been thinking about this question, because his response came without hesitation. "I want to undergo additional training in cultural competency and unconscious bias, and I want to share my experience today with other dealerships in our network. If my mistake can prevent others from making the same error, then perhaps something positive can come from this situation." The proposal surprised everyone, including Harold. Marcus was suggesting that he become a cautionary tale, sharing his failure publicly as a means of education and prevention. It was either a genuine commitment to growth or a sophisticated attempt at reputation rehabilitation. Harold studied Marcus for a long moment before responding. "That's a significant commitment, Mr. Wellington. Are you prepared for the professional and personal exposure that would involve?" "Yes, sir. If it helps prevent other people from experiencing what you experienced today, then it's the least I can do." Jennifer stepped forward, her voice carrying newfound confidence. "Mr. Mitchell, I'd like to volunteer to participate in that educational program as well. I may not have actively participated in the initial mistreatment, but my failure to intervene was its own form of complicity. I want to learn how to be better and help others learn as well." Harold's attention shifted to Jennifer, and she felt the full weight of his evaluation. "Ms. Walsh, complicity through silence is indeed a form of participation in prejudice. I'm pleased to see that you recognize that distinction." Bradley, not to be outdone in this competition for redemption, added his own commitment. "Mr. Mitchell, I've been in this industry for 15 years, and I've probably witnessed variations of today's incident more times than I care to admit. I want to help create a culture where such incidents become impossible rather than just uncommon." Harold looked around the group, seeing what appeared to be genuine remorse and commitment to change among the sales team. However, his years of business experience had taught him to value actions over intentions, results over promises. "These are all admirable commitments," Harold said carefully. "But there's one more element that needs to be addressed before I can consider moving forward with any business relationship." The group waited anxiously to hear what additional requirement Harold might impose. They had already committed to training, policy changes, public education, and personal accountability. What more could he possibly want? "I need to see how you treat the next customer who doesn't meet your traditional expectations," Harold said simply. "Anyone can promise to change when they're facing consequences for their behavior. The real test is what happens when you think no one important is watching." The insight was profound and devastating. Harold understood that sustainable change required more than policies and training. It required fundamental shifts in character and values that would persist even when external pressure was absent. Patricia nodded thoughtfully, recognizing the wisdom of Harold's observation. How would you suggest we demonstrate that kind of authentic change? Before Harold could respond, the front doors of Premier Motors opened again, and another customer entered the showroom. This time, it was a young woman in casual attire, looking somewhat overwhelmed by the opulent surroundings as she tentatively approached the vehicle displays. Harold's expression shifted subtly, and everyone present realized that fate had just provided the perfect opportunity to test whether their promises of change were genuine or merely convenient responses to crisis. "It appears," Harold said quietly, "that we're about to find out exactly how committed Premier Motors is to treating every customer with dignity and respect." All eyes turned toward the young woman, who was now standing near a display of luxury sedans, clearly unsure of how to proceed. She carried herself with the hesitant body language of someone who wasn't entirely certain she belonged in such an upscale environment. The moment of truth had arrived. Everything the sales team had said about change and commitment was about to be tested in real time, under the watchful eyes of the man they had wronged, and in front of the colleagues whose respect they hoped to regain. Marcus took a deep breath and made a decision that would either validate his promises or expose them as empty rhetoric. He began walking toward the young woman, his movements watched by every person in the showroom as they waited to see whether Premier Motors' commitment to change was real or merely performative. "Good afternoon," Marcus said, as he approached the young customer, his voice carrying warmth and genuine interest. "Welcome to Premier Motors. I'm Marcus Wellington, and I'd be honored to help you find exactly what you're looking for today." Harold watched this interaction with the intense focus of someone conducting a final examination. The young woman's response to Marcus, and his response to her, would determine whether Premier Motors had truly learned from their mistakes, or if they were simply skilled at managing crisis situations while maintaining their underlying prejudices. The test had begun, and everyone involved understood that the results would determine not just the future of a potential business relationship, but the character and integrity of everyone present. The young woman looked up as Marcus approached, her expression mixing surprise with cautious hope. She appeared to be in her early 20s, carrying herself with the careful posture of someone who had learned to be wary of situations where she might not be welcome. "Thank you," she said quietly, her voice carrying a slight accent that suggested English might not be her first language. "I'm not sure I'm in the right place, though. I'm looking for something reliable and affordable, and this seems like it might be out of my range." Marcus felt the weight of every eye in the showroom as he processed her words. This was the moment of truth. Would he fall back into old patterns of judgment and dismissal, or would he demonstrate that the promises he had made to Harold were genuine? "Every customer is in the right place when they're looking for quality and reliability," Marcus replied warmly, surprising himself with how natural the words felt. "What kind of driving do you do, and what's most important to you in a vehicle?" Harold watched this interaction with the intense focus of someone whose entire evaluation of Premier Motors depended on what happened next. He had witnessed Marcus's initial failure and heard his promises of change, but actions in this moment would reveal the truth about the young sales manager's character. The young woman's name was Sophia Martinez, and she was a nursing student working multiple jobs to pay for her education while supporting her younger siblings. She needed reliable transportation to get between her job at a local hospital, her classes at the community college, and her second job cleaning offices on weekends. As Sophia explained her situation, Marcus found himself genuinely listening, not just for sales opportunities, but for ways to understand her actual needs and find solutions that would serve her best interests. This was a completely different approach from the one he had typically used with customers he perceived as having limited budgets. "Let me show you some options that might work perfectly for your situation," Marcus said, guiding Sophia toward a section of the showroom that featured certified pre-owned vehicles. "We have several reliable models that come with excellent warranties and maintenance programs." Trevor watched this interaction with growing awareness of how differently Marcus was handling Sophia compared to how he himself had initially approached Harold. Marcus was asking thoughtful questions, listening carefully to her responses, and focusing on her needs rather than making assumptions about her financial capabilities. Patricia observed from a distance, recognizing that this spontaneous test was providing invaluable insight into whether her team was capable of authentic change or if their earlier promises had been merely reactive damage control. Sophia's presence had transformed the showroom into a laboratory for measuring genuine transformation. I should probably mention that I'm still building my credit, Sophia said hesitantly, clearly expecting this information to end the conversation or change Marcus's level of interest in helping her. Instead, Marcus nodded understandingly. Building credit is a smart financial strategy, especially when you're in school. Let me introduce you to our financing specialist, who can explain all your options and help you find something that fits your budget and supports your credit-building goals. Harold's expression shifted slightly, showing what might have been approval at Marcus's response. Rather than using Sophia's credit situation as a reason to dismiss her or redirect her elsewhere, Marcus was treating it as simply another factor to consider in finding the right solution. Jennifer stepped forward, having been observing this interaction with growing understanding of what genuine customer service looked like. Sophia, I'm Jennifer Walsh, and I'd be happy to walk you through our financing options. We work with several lenders who specialize in helping young professionals establish strong credit histories. The collaboration between Marcus and Jennifer demonstrated something that had been missing from their earlier interaction with Harold: teamwork focused on customer service rather than individual commission opportunities. They were working together to serve Sophia's needs rather than competing for personal advantage. Bradley approached the group, carrying a tablet with information about maintenance programs and extended warranties. Sophia, given your schedule and the importance of reliable transportation for your work and studies, you might be interested in our comprehensive maintenance packages. They can help you budget for vehicle care and ensure you're never stranded due to unexpected repairs. What was happening around Sophia was exactly what should have happened when Harold first entered Premier Motors. A team of professionals was collaborating to understand her needs, present appropriate options, and provide information that would help her make the best decision for her circumstances. Harold continued to observe, but his attention was now divided between the interaction happening with Sophia and the broader transformation taking place among the Premier Motors staff. The change he was witnessing appeared to be genuine rather than performative, which suggested that his challenge had catalyzed real growth rather than mere crisis management. Sophia, Marcus said after they had spent nearly an hour exploring options and explaining various programs, I want you to take your time with this decision. Here's my card, and I want you to feel free to call me with any questions, even after you've had time to think things over. Purchasing a vehicle is a significant decision, and you should never feel pressured to decide before you're completely comfortable. This approach was the opposite of the high-pressure sales tactics that Premier Motors had previously employed with customers they perceived as potentially easy targets. Marcus was demonstrating respect for Sophia's decision-making process and prioritizing her long-term satisfaction over immediate sales closure. Harold stepped forward for the first time since Sophia had entered the showroom. "Excuse me," he said gently, approaching the group. "I couldn't help but notice the excellent service you're receiving. As someone who values quality customer service, I wanted to commend this team for their professionalism." Sophia looked surprised but pleased by Harold's intervention. "They've been wonderful," she said sincerely. "I was nervous about coming to a place like this, but everyone has been so helpful and patient with my questions." Harold's smile was genuine as he turned to Marcus. "Mr. Wellington, that was exactly the kind of customer service that builds lasting relationships and strong reputations." The validation from Harold hit Marcus like a wave of relief and pride. He had passed the test, not through calculated performance, but through authentic engagement with Sophia's needs and circumstances. The change he had promised was proving to be real. "Mr. Mitchell," Marcus said, "thank you for the lesson. Working with Sophia has reminded me what this business should really be about. Helping people find solutions that improve their lives, regardless of how much they spend or what they look like when they walk through our doors." Patricia seized this moment to make an announcement that would cement Premier Motors' commitment to change. "Everyone," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the showroom, "what we've witnessed today represents the new standard for customer service at Premier Motors. Every person who enters this facility deserves the respect, attention, and professionalism that Sophia has received." The declaration was met with nods of agreement from the staff, but more importantly, it was witnessed by the other customers who had remained to observe this remarkable transformation. Word would spread through their social and professional networks about what they had seen at Premier Motors. Not just the initial failure, but the authentic change that had followed. Harold reached into his jacket and withdrew a business card, which he handed to Sophia. "Sophia, I'm Harold Mitchell from Mitchell Transport. If you ever decide you'd like to explore opportunities in logistics or transportation while you're building your career, please don't hesitate to contact me. We're always looking for dedicated, hard-working people. The gesture was unexpected and generous, but it also served a strategic purpose. Harold was demonstrating that recognizing potential and treating people with dignity could create opportunities and connections that extended far beyond any single transaction. "Now then," Harold said, turning back to Patricia and Marcus, "I believe we have some trucks to discuss." The words were simple, but their implications were enormous. Harold had decided to move forward with the purchase, which meant that Premier Motors had successfully navigated from disaster to redemption. The $2 million sale was back on the table, along with the potential for an ongoing business relationship worth tens of millions of dollars. But perhaps more importantly, Harold's willingness to proceed represented validation that genuine change was possible, that people and organizations could learn from their mistakes and emerge stronger and more principled than before. Patricia felt a surge of pride and relief as she realized that Premier Motors had not only avoided disaster but had actually strengthened its reputation through honest acknowledgement of failure and authentic commitment to improvement. "Mr. Mitchell," Patricia said, "it would be our honor to help you select the 5 trucks that Mitchell Transport needs, and to earn the opportunity to serve your company's ongoing vehicle requirements." "And it would be my honor," Harold replied, "to work with a dealership that has demonstrated the courage to change and the wisdom to recognize that business success and human dignity are not mutually exclusive." 3 months later, the transformation at Premier Motors had become the talk of the automotive industry. What had begun as a moment of profound failure had evolved into a blueprint for how businesses could authentically address prejudice and create cultures of genuine inclusion. The 5 Mercedes commercial trucks that Harold had purchased were now proudly serving Mitchell Transport's operations, but their significance extended far beyond their commercial value. They had become symbols of what was possible when organizations chose growth over defensiveness, accountability over denial, and change over comfort. Marcus stood in the same showroom where his worldview had been shattered and rebuilt. But everything felt different now. The space looked the same. The polished marble floors, the gleaming vehicles, the soft lighting that made everything sparkle with luxury, but the energy was completely transformed. Instead of the predatory hunger that had once characterized the sales environment, there was now a sense of genuine service and human connection. "Good morning, Premier Motors. This is Marcus Wellington. How can I help you create an exceptional automotive experience today?" Marcus spoke into his phone with warmth and enthusiasm that would have been impossible to fake just months earlier. The caller was Elizabeth Chen, a recent immigrant who had been nervous about visiting luxury dealerships due to previous experiences with dismissive treatment. She had heard about Premier Motors' reputation for inclusive service through community networks and wanted to explore options for reliable family transportation. "Mrs. Chen," Marcus said, after listening carefully to her concerns and requirements, "I would be honored to help you find the perfect vehicle for your family. When would be a convenient time for you to visit? And please know that we have translators available if that would make you more comfortable." This conversation would have been unimaginable during Marcus's earlier approach to customer service. The old Marcus would have quickly categorized Elizabeth based on assumptions about her background and financial capacity. The new Marcus saw her as a unique individual with specific needs that deserved thoughtful attention and expert guidance. Patricia walked through the showroom, observing the interactions between her staff and customers with deep satisfaction. The mystery shopping reports had been consistently excellent, with diverse evaluators praising the respectful, professional treatment they received, regardless of their appearance or perceived economic status. But more importantly, the cultural change had improved business performance across every metric. Customer satisfaction scores had reached record highs, referral rates had increased dramatically, and sales volume had grown significantly as word spread about Premier Motors' exceptional service culture. Trevor approached Patricia with a tablet showing the latest customer feedback reports. In the months since Harold's visit, Trevor had transformed from an inexperienced salesperson making assumptions about customers to a thoughtful professional who understood that every interaction was an opportunity to serve and learn. "Ms. Hawthorne," Trevor said, "the feedback from this month's evaluations is incredible. We're not just meeting the new standards, we're exceeding them consistently across all departments." Patricia smiled as she reviewed the data, seeing concrete evidence that sustainable change was possible when people committed to genuine growth rather than superficial compliance. Trevor, what do you think has made the biggest difference in how we serve customers now? Trevor considered the question thoughtfully before responding. I think we stopped trying to decide who deserved our best service and started giving our best service to everyone. When you remove prejudice from the equation, you can focus entirely on understanding and meeting people's actual needs. The observation was profound in its simplicity. Trevor had identified the core insight that Harold's challenge had revealed, that prejudice was not just morally wrong, but strategically stupid. It prevented organizations from recognizing opportunities, building relationships, and serving markets effectively. Jennifer emerged from her office where she had been conducting a video conference with dealerships from other cities who wanted to learn about Premier Motors' transformation process. The story of Harold's visit and its aftermath had spread throughout the automotive industry, inspiring other organizations to examine their own practices and cultures. "Patricia," Jennifer said, her voice filled with excitement, "I just finished presenting our inclusion training program to a network of dealerships in the Pacific Northwest. They want to implement similar changes at their locations and have invited us to consult on their transformation process." What had begun as a moment of professional embarrassment had evolved into a consulting opportunity that was generating additional revenue while spreading positive change throughout their industry. Premier Motors was becoming known not just for selling luxury vehicles, but for pioneering approaches to inclusive business practices. The front doors opened, and Harold entered the showroom for what had become a monthly visit to observe Premier Motors' progress and provide guidance on their ongoing development. His presence no longer created tension or anxiety among the staff. Instead, it generated genuine excitement as team members looked forward to sharing their latest successes and seeking his advice on emerging challenges. "Good afternoon, Mr. Mitchell," Marcus said, approaching Harold with the confident warmth of someone greeting a respected mentor. "How are things at Mitchell Transport?" "Thriving, thanks to our new fleet of Mercedes trucks," Harold replied with a smile. "But more importantly, I'm here to see how you're doing with the real transformation work." Harold's monthly visits had become informal masterclasses in organizational change and cultural development. He would observe customer interactions, review feedback data, and provide insights based on his decades of experience building inclusive business practices at Mitchell Transport. "I have something special to share with you today," Harold said, reaching into his familiar cloth bag and withdrawing a letter. "This arrived at my office yesterday and I thought you should see it." Marcus accepted the letter, recognizing the Mitchell Transport letterhead but not understanding why Harold would be sharing company correspondence with him. As he began reading, his expression shifted from curiosity to amazement. The letter was from Sophia Martinez, the nursing student whose experience at Premier Motors had served as the crucial test of their commitment to change. She was writing to inform Harold that she had successfully completed her nursing degree and had accepted a position with a prestigious hospital system. But more importantly, she was announcing her decision to accept Harold's offer to join Mitchell Transport's management training program while continuing her healthcare career on a part-time basis. "Sophia is going to help us develop health and wellness programs for our drivers while building her experience in business management," Harold explained. "Her combination of healthcare expertise and personal understanding of economic challenges makes her uniquely qualified to help us better serve our workforce." Marcus felt a wave of emotion as he realized the long-term impact of that pivotal day. Sophia's respectful treatment at Premier Motors had not only resulted in her successful vehicle purchase, but had led to career opportunities that were transforming her life trajectory. A single moment of choosing dignity over prejudice had created ripple effects that extended far beyond anyone's expectations. "But there's more," Harold continued, his eyes twinkling with satisfaction. "Sophia has specifically requested to lead a training session for your team about recognizing and serving customers from diverse economic backgrounds. She wants to help ensure that other young people in challenging circumstances receive the same respectful treatment she experienced here." The full circle of transformation was breathtaking in its completeness. Sophia had gone from being a nervous customer, uncertain of her welcome, to becoming an educator who would help Premier Motors continue improving their inclusive service practices. Patricia joined the group, having overheard Harold's announcement about Sophia's new role. "Mr. Mitchell, we would be honored to have Sophia contribute to our ongoing training programs." Her perspective as someone who has experienced both sides of this equation would be invaluable. And, Harold added with the timing of someone who understood the power of dramatic revelation, Mitchell Transport has decided to expand our premium fleet significantly. We're prepared to purchase an additional 20 Mercedes commercial vehicles over the next year, with the potential for even larger orders as our business continues growing. The financial implications were staggering. An additional 20 trucks represented over $8 million in sales, making Mitchell Transport one of Premier Motors' largest commercial accounts. But Harold's announcement carried meaning that transcended monetary value. It represented validation that Premier Motors' transformation was genuine and sustainable. Bradley approached the group, carrying a framed photograph that had arrived earlier that day. Mr. Mitchell, this came for you from the Regional Automotive Excellence Awards Committee. The photograph showed Harold receiving a special recognition award for his role in inspiring positive change throughout the automotive industry. His willingness to challenge Premier Motors, rather than simply taking his business elsewhere, had catalyzed transformations at dealerships across multiple states. The real award, Harold said, studying the photograph, isn't the recognition. It's seeing what happens when people choose growth over comfort, accountability over defensiveness, and inclusion over prejudice. Trevor stepped forward, his voice carrying the conviction of someone whose entire worldview had been reconstructed. Mr. Mitchell, I want to thank you for seeing potential in us, even after we demonstrated our worst behavior. You could have destroyed our careers and our dealership's reputation, but instead you chose to teach us how to be better. Harold's expression softened as he looked at Trevor, seeing the genuine transformation that had taken place in the young salesman. Trevor, you taught yourselves how to be better. I just provided the motivation to begin that process. Marcus felt compelled to add his own reflection on the journey they had all experienced. Mr. Mitchell, when you first walked through our doors, I thought success meant selling to the right kind of people. You taught us that success means becoming the right kind of people. The observation captured the essence of what had transpired at Premier Motors. They had learned that character and competence were not separate qualities, but interconnected aspects of genuine excellence. Treating people with dignity wasn't just morally correct. It was strategically brilliant. Jennifer produced a folder containing letters from customers whose lives had been positively impacted by Premier Motors' new approach to service. There were thank you notes from elderly customers who had been treated with patience and respect, gratitude from young families who had received honest guidance about their transportation needs, and appreciation from business owners who had found in Premier Motors a partner rather than just a vendor. These letters represent the real measure of our transformation, Jennifer said. We're not just selling vehicles anymore. We're changing lives and building community. Harold nodded approvingly as he reviewed the correspondence, seeing evidence that Premier Motors had internalized the lessons he had hoped to teach. When you treat every person with dignity and respect, you don't just change their experience. You change your own character in the process. As the day drew to a close, Harold prepared to leave Premier Motors with the satisfaction of someone who had witnessed authentic human growth. The showroom that had once been a monument to superficial luxury had become a laboratory for demonstrating that business success and human dignity were not just compatible, but synergistic. Before I go, Harold said, I want to leave you with one final thought. What happened here wasn't really about trucks or sales or even customer service. It was about the choice between seeing people as they appear to be or as who they might become. You chose to see potential rather than limitations, growth rather than failure, and possibility rather than prejudice. Harold's words hung in the air like a benediction, summarizing the profound transformation that had taken place not just at Premier Motors, but in the hearts and minds of everyone who had participated in this journey. Marcus, Trevor, Jennifer, Bradley, and Patricia stood together as Harold walked toward the exit, each of them permanently changed by an encounter that had begun with failure and ended with redemption. They had learned that second chances were not gifts to be received passively, but opportunities to be earned through authentic commitment to growth and change. As Harold reached the door, he turned back one final time. Remember, he said with a smile that contained both warmth and wisdom, how you treat someone who can do nothing for you reveals everything about who you truly are. The doors closed behind Harold Mitchell, but the lesson remained forever embedded in the culture of Premier Motors and in the hearts of everyone who had witnessed the power of choosing dignity over prejudice, growth over comfort, and human potential over surface appearances.